Right. Thanks, Chris, for being our speaker today on Max Power Lab. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great, thanks, Mike. And can you let me share the screen? There we go. All right, does everybody see my slide?
We can see it.
Great, thanks, Mike, and thanks for all the great work that NCyTE does. I use it as a resource, and you guys really do some great things there. Appreciate everything you guys do. So I'm Chris Simpson. I'm with National University. I see a couple familiar names in the chat here, so it's good to see everybody again. And if I haven't met you before, nice to meet you. So this morning I'm going to talk about the Max Power Lab collection on the Clark Center. And basically what this is it's a listing right now. There's about 34 objects in there, and it's basically a list of free labs that are available to use. And there's mapping to the NICE framework and KUs and things like that to help faculty find labs that are good for their students. So the agenda for the talk. So I'll do a quick overview of the Clark Center. I'll try not to steal too much of Sid's and the Clark Center team's thunder for next month, but it's a great resource. Then I'll talk a little bit about the Max Power collection. And then I'll hop on for a demo, and we'll hop onto the Clark Center and I'll show you what it looks like on there. And then if we have time, I'll hop onto some of the free labs and show you what some of those interfaces look like. And then I'll wrap up with ways that you can contribute if you would like to contribute to the project. And I'll take some pauses as we go along here to take questions, and you're also welcome to post questions in chat as we go along. So just out of curiosity, how many people here are already familiar with the Clark Center? Maybe type a Y in chat, just so I get an idea. Or an N if you're not familiar with it. Okay. Oh, great. So yeah, it looks like a fair amount of folks are familiar with it. So the Clark Center, this is one of the best resources for free curriculum on the internet. It's a collection from various different projects, CE projects, and other government and grant funded projects. It's all free. You can take the content, repurpose it, update it as you like. As I got on the slide here, 1,240 learning objects and growing quickly, and it's a great resource. I use it all the time for the content in our curriculum. So it's a knowledge base, and it's a platform for building, submitting material to, and a platform for pulling out material that you want to use in your courses. So, and it's really a really broad spectrum of content, all the way from K-12 all the way up to graduate level work. And they break it down into consumers and contributors. So consumers, you register and you can download, any of the content on Clark. And then contributors, if you want to contribute your content, you can submit it. I'll show you what that looks like when I get to the demo phase. And it's really easy to use too, and I'll show you what that looks like. And so here's their mission statement. So they're really providing cybersecurity educators at all levels, high quality content and building blocks. And the nice thing about Clark is it really is building blocks. So I might, like, for example, I'll download some content, maybe use 2 slides from something, or just add it on and use that as kind of a core as I expand, content for a specific course. And the key things about Clark is they want to make it easy to get stuff in, and I'll show you in the demo. They've got Bloom's taxonomy there, makes it kind of easy to fill stuff in. And then when you put in keywords, it'll actually pull out things from the NICE framework and KUs um, that you can use to identify the content that you're uploading. Uh, it's quality curriculum. They do have a review process. They've got active curators. They do peer review, clear learning outcomes, and there's a revision process too. It's free. They've got a great search, so there's no tricks or anything like that. And they do keep it up to date. You know, in the past, some of these sites, maybe the content gets stale after a while, but they do keep it up. And you know, there's a review option and things like that. And it all the content's released under Creative Commons type of license. And they've got so much content. I've been using Clark since it started, so they've got so much content now. They have different collections for different purposes, and each one is unique. It's got a different peer review process, and it's supported by its own community. You can see NCyTE has their own collection up here. Gen Cyber, Max Power, which is the one I'll talk about. Nice Challenge, Deter Lab. So a lot of great resources here that you can use. So, any questions on Clark in general before I move on to the next part? Okay. So, so just to give a little background, so you know, hands-on labs are a critical component of a cybersecurity program, and you're actually required to have hands-on labs in your program if you want to become a center of academic excellence. Uh, for students, hands-on labs allow them to demonstrate skills for potential employers, right? Because the employers, they want, you know, students that are workforce ready when they come out of college. Uh, and it's pretty challenging to run your own lab environment. I've got some other talks I've given that are on the CAE Tech Talks about kind of our migration from our own hosted virtual environment, moving into using free and open source labs. So feel free to check that out. I won't get too much into that. But the nice thing is there's a ton of free and low cost lab environments out there, browser based, easy to use. But kind of the problem is there's actually too many out there in the sense of, you know, if you want to find something specific for your class, right, that meets your learning objectives, that meets your content goals, and things like that. So it can be time consuming to, you know, find those labs. You know, if you Google around, it can take a while to test those out. So I met with the Clark Center team, Blair and Sid, and talked about taking some of the mapping we've done for some of the free labs that we use in our program and putting those on Clark just to make it easy for other schools to find those labs and kind of share our knowledge. So the Max Power Collection, it's a collection of free labs that support cybersecurity curriculum. And just for clarification, these labs aren't developed by me or National University or anybody. They're vendor labs. But many of these vendors, they typically follow the freemium model, and so they'll have a set of free labs. And then if you want to get more labs, you know, there's some type of subscription fee. So these labs are hosted by independent vendors. But the nice thing is they're all browser based, at least the ones in the collection. So it makes it easy for students. You don't have to worry about, you know, trying to run 4 VMs on a local machine and things like that. So, and just got a screenshot here of some of the labs, and I'll hop into the Max Power collection when I get to the demo portion. So, one caveat, you know, just because the labs are listed here, it's not an official endorsement of any provider by any government agency, the Clark Center or National University. So it's just it's just data, right? It's just, hey, these labs, we think they map to um, these objectives and nice framework, but there's no endorsement by any of these agencies. And for these labs, you typically have to create an account. They have their own end user license agreement. So, whatever the rules that govern your university or your school, just make sure you follow those. So what we've got in the lab collection, it's the name of the lab and lab provider, a link to the lab, outcomes mapped to the NICE framework and KU. Some are a little more detailed, some a little less detailed. There are recommended levels, but each program varies. So you can take that with a grain of salt. Some labs that you use in a graduate program are perfectly good for seniors in high school, right? Because maybe they're advanced or they're similar in the master's program. You're just introducing things and getting some hands-on skills for your graduate students. Some of them have additional references like videos on some of the tools and things like that. There's a couple modules on accessing the labs too, just to help you learn how to do that. And also, there's some competency statements. These are very preliminary. There's several competency-based working groups in the CA community. So I just kind of threw those out there just as kind of a test to see what it might look like, and I'll show you what they look like when I get to the demo part. And this is just an example of what the competency statement looks like. And once again, they're still the CA community is still kind of hashing out what the full format's going to look like. So they're examples only. But you give the subtask what they're going to do, the condition, what they're given, the degree, how quick, and then the effectiveness that they do it. And this is located in the notes section of those different objects. And I'll show you that when we get to the demo. All right. Are there any questions on what I've talked about? Questions or comments on what I've talked about so far? All right. Can everybody see my browser, and does it look big enough?
Looks good here.
All right. So this is a main Clark page, and let me just paste this into chat too, so you've got it. If anybody wants to go learn. So this is the main page. And you can see all the objects. You can create a login. I'm already logged into my account. And so if you click here, you see the different collections that I mentioned, and you just click on the collections to learn more about it. So I will hop on to Max Power. And so you can see here, they've got some featured ones. I will say, immersive labs, a lot of these don't work now. They just went through a major upgrade on their website. So I've been going through and doing some revisions on them. So if you get a broken link on the immersive labs, that lab is probably gone. They just made some major upgrades, but I'll show you that as we go through. And then you can click here on the browse collection, and you can do some filtering, right? So most of the ones I put up are nano modules because they're just individual labs that are linked to. You can do some other searching by topic, type of material, level. So, if you're, I think I saw K-12 teachers in the chat. So, if you want to do your level, you can just search there. So you can do some filtering that helps you find what you're looking for. Let me do a blue team one since I know they still work. So for the description, it typically has the provider, the lab name, and I've quoted the lab scenario from their website just to make that so you get kind of a brief description. And then here, the learning outcomes. So excuse me. So these are learning outcomes for the labs. And the level, right? K-12, college, undergraduate, graduate, corporate training. There's typically in the ones I did for Max Power, there's no files, but they'll typically have URLs. What I do is I put a link to the main website and then to the specific lab. And sometimes these do change. I just had to email actually this one I had to fix yesterday. And some labs you can download stuff for local use too. So if there's a link there or something that's relevant to the lab, I've got that there. And then a note section, and this is where a little more information about the lab, and it may have the kind of the notional or draft competency kind of statement, just to give you an idea of what it has. And let me go back and find. Let's see, and any questions on what I've covered so far? And this is just an example. This is just an object on how to access the Blue Team Labs, and it just links to a video. So you got the learning outcomes on this one, and so you can see this one's mapped to some of the NCyTE framework, some of the KSAs for the NCyTE framework. So if you're looking for those, you can kind of search for those and see how those fit in. And then let me show you the URLs. And then so if you click this link, it takes you to the lab, and I'll show you the lab providers here in a second after I show you what how you input the labs if you want to make updates. Any questions what I've covered so far? All right. So to put in objects it's rather easy, and I'm sure Sid and the team will cover that, and Blair and the team will cover that next next month. But just real quick, so you can see, I've released 34. We're doing a zero trust thing that should be coming out later this summer. So you create a new object. I'll just show you this one. They make it real easy to update labs. So you put in the name of the learning object, you put in the author, you pick the module that you want, you pick the levels, and then you talk a little bit about, you describe the learning object. And this is where the real power comes in. So they've got the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So you can pick here, right? So you can pick, let's see, classify security logs, just an example. And then on the right side, it'll map to the CAEKU's NCyTE framework to make it easy to add some additional mappings for that lab. So it's really nice to use. And then materials, you can add files for the Max Power collection. It's typically I just do the URLs and add those in, and then any notes, applicable notes. All right. So there's in the current Max Power collection, there's three core labs that we've got in there. We've got Immersive Labs, Blue Team Labs, and Try Hack Me. And I'll show you a little bit about each one of those, just so you get an idea of what they look like. So Blue Team Labs, this site is really good. In the lab world, most of the labs out there are red team or pen testing kind of labs. So this Blue Team Labs is really good. They focus on investigation, security operations, and things like that. And you can see they've got free, and then they got a professional model. Many of these services offer a free, or I'm sorry, lower cost for .edu for students. They typically have dashboards and rankings that you can use and make it nice. And They also have write-ups too. So some of the retired ones they have write-ups. So that I kind of use those the write-up ones for students as they kind of learn if they need help, and then I try to do maybe some more of the ones that don't have write-ups. Maybe do that more for the assessment side. With Blue Team Labs, they've got investigations and challenges. So let me just click on challenges here. And so you can see, easy, medium, hard. You can see the ones you've completed. You can share it out on LinkedIn and things like that. If you look down here on the left side, these you can kind of filter the different categories, and you can filter free and pro. You see pro because I've got a subscription here, and then just to give you an example of what one looks like. So they give you a scenario, and either they'll give you some type of file you download and you analyze that on your computer, or they have a virtual machine that you use for some of the labs too. They've got some really good log ones, so you can see. And then you just put in you answer the questions, and let me see. And they'll typically tell you the OS and things like that for the challenges. And let me see. I think this one had a virtual machine. Let me just double check. Nope, that's a file one. Maybe the investigation ones are more. And then they have the investigation side. So these are, they've got threat hunter, analysts, and things like that. Let me look at this one, see if this has the. Yeah, so here you start the investigation and you use their virtual machine, and here's using Deep Blue command line interface. They've got a leaderboard, so it's a nice environment for the blue team side, and I've used some grant funding to buy codes for students to let them do projects too, so that's an option with this lab. Are there any questions on Blue Team Labs? Wow, it's a quiet group. Must be Friday in summer here. All right. So the next one that their labs that are linked to is TriAgmin. Let me do something here. Go back. So here's just an example, right? So it's a free lab from TryHackMe. So if you wanted to test this one out, you visit the link, and it'll open up the lab. And so TryHackMe is a little bit different than Blue Team. It's a browser-based lab environment, and they break things down into tasks, right? And they also have browser-based virtual machines you can do, or you can VPN if you want to use your own virtual machine. But their IDS labs are really good, and basically you go through and you answer these questions about the labs, um, and so don't copy my answers here. I can't obscure the answers for the ones I've done, but you go through and they've got a nice investigation on this one, and you go through and complete the task, and they've got a dashboard and things like that. Um, and if you go to, they have different learning paths too, which are really nice. So they've got Red Team, Intro to Cybersecurity, Pre-Security. Some of these are free and some of these are paid. They've got some new SOC level stuff, offensive security, a little bit of security mapping. And the way you can find the free ones is you hit the free only, and if you do a search for that, you get the ones that are uh, free only, and that's a nice way to, if you want to find what's in your class, what to use for your class. Are there any questions or comments on TryHackMe? So just out of curiosity, is anybody using TryHackMe or Blue Team Labs in your programs? Great. Oh, it looks like several people do. Okay, good. All right. And um, the oh yeah, so yeah, thanks Barbara for sharing that. So try Hack Me, they do 25 days of cyber the holiday season. And that's a nice event. It's free. It's kind of a CTF. You get points, they give away prizes. And I know I saw some K-12 folks in the chat too. These are good for, high school students, maybe middle school knowledge-wise middle school, but sometimes you have to be a little more careful with middle school students and web environments. But there's certainly, especially the entry level ones or the basic ones for the K-12 folks. And then last but not least, so this is Immersive Labs, and they recently changed their interface. They have this new program where it's called Cyber Million. They want to help grow the workforce. So a lot of the links are broken in the Clark Center and the Max Power part. I'm working on getting those fixed. But what's nice about Immersive Labs, if you sign up with an EDU, if you go to Digital Cyber Academy, and actually let me do a link for that in the chat. Yeah, they call it Cyber Million now. So they used to call it Digital Cyber Academy, but that's a registration page. And so they've got, I'm not sure what everything that's going to be available on the free side, but this the fundamental one. So you can see basic, cyber stuff here for them. And you click on here. You can see these are kind of more kind of definitional question and answer stuff, and they do badges and things like that for completing those. Let me show you a lab one here. So they break it down into different sectors. You can see they got networking, incident response, kill chain, MITRE attack, Linux, packet analysis. So let me hop on this one here. And the way their labs work, they give you some learning outcomes, and you click on the continue lab. And what they do is, so you can see they typically have, some things on the left side, so questions that you have to answer um, to do it, and there'll be some type of briefing, and generally there's enough stuff in the briefing for the students to be able to solve the question. They don't have to do or solve the questions. They don't have to move out, and then they'll give you some type of virtual desktop, and the students do the assignments here, and you can pop it out if you want to. And they've got a clipboard too if you need to get stuff from the virtual machine into the task list. So you just go through and answer the task. It's a um, uh, nice little setup for everybody. They've got one of the new things they added. Let me go back here, and I haven't tested this out. Oops. But for each of these areas, like they've got it like a kind of to see if you've mastered it. I haven't tried this out yet, but like a demonstration, right, to see if you can have already mastered the skills, so you don't have to do the individual lessons. Is there are there any questions on immersive labs? Okay. And I just wanted to share, especially for the K-12 folks, there's this other um, uh, platform that's new. It's a gamified platform, and it's called World of Haiku, and it's kind of video game like, but it's also technical from, learning how and then, getting better. But I was at a meeting earlier this week, and they mentioned they use this for some Girl Scout camps, and it really the girls really like the gaming environment, and it kind of helped pull them into kind of being more technical in cybersecurity. I know we're trying to diversify our cybersecurity workforce with more women in the workforce. So I just figured I'd toss that out there, and I will um, uh, just share that out in case anybody's interested. Once again, not an official endorsement or anything like that, but I'm just sharing a resource. And let me go back to my slides. So, if you think the projects is interesting, and maybe if you use some of these labs yourself, feel free to submit labs to the Clark Center using the process. I showed you. There's also feedback mechanisms. So, like, if you like a lab, you can do feedback, or you don't like it, it's not applicable. Or, if the learning outcomes weren't quite right, you can get feedback that way, and then report broken links too. That way we can get those fixed. I'm a bit of a quick quick talker, so that's kind of the formal part of the presentation. I'm happy to do some more demos if anybody has questions. Here's my email address in the chat too. And you're always welcome to email me any questions or recommendations too. I'm always looking for new lab environments, especially the low cost and free ones. And I just scratched the surface on the free and low cost ones. You can check out my CAE Tech Talks, and uh, if you want more information. So Joy, good question. I know they have an if for Try Hack Me, if you register with a EDU account, you get a much lower price. Um, and Oh, thanks for sharing that, Barbara. And it's we use a dashboard in our program, and so you can create your own custom learning paths. Actually, I can show you. I think I can show you one here if you want to see. Let me see. Give me 1 second. So yeah, we use their learning paths. So you can see these are some of our classrooms that we use learning paths for. And actually, let me stop share for a sec. I'm gonna share student data. 1 second. And so this is just an example from our red teaming class. So we do 4 week classes. So uh, these are the labs they do each week in the classes, and it's nice because the students get this link, they hop on, and we do the token model. So we just assign tokens to the students that we purchase. but it's nice and easy to use. And they've actually got, as part of the subscription, they've got kind of full Windows Active Directory environments too that are really good and kind of challenging. Yeah, great point, Barbara, too. Yeah, they are very supportive with that too, for mapping your content. All right. Are there any other questions or comments for me or for anybody else?
Chris, I think it was a really quiet group today, but they seemed really engaged. Everybody was pretty engaged in the chat. So there's some great questions. I don't know if there's more questions for Chris.
Maybe they all hopped onto the lab and they're all doing labs right now. They're so much fun, right?
You gave them a lot of links to check out. And just a reminder, I'll collect the links and I'll send them out in an email to everybody who's at the meeting today.
And I'll put the other lab environments in there too, just so you got them.
Also dropped a link in there for our survey, so please fill out the NCyTE survey. It's great to get your feedback. We have 11 meetings per year, so we try to schedule these monthly meetings that are going to be like this one, engaging and interesting, and something that you can take back to your work and be able to use. We're also, if you're interested in presenting, that's also something that could be, we would definitely love to hear what topic or idea that you want to present on. Kind of wrapping things up here, Chris. I'm not sure if you have more you want to go over, or
No, that's all I've got. Thanks for inviting me to present, Mike. I always, like to share information. I always learn new things when I come to these meetings too, and appreciate all the great work that NCyTE does too for the community.
Well, Chris, that was a great job. Appreciated it. Very interesting.
Thank you.
all right. Well, we'll close this down a little early today then.
All right, early out on a Friday. Woo!
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend, and have a great long weekend if you have Monday off. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Have a good day.
Appreciate everybody coming out today. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good one.
All right, you too.